On today's webinar, we're going to be starting to take a look at the very basic reports that come as standard with GA4, and they're split up into just a very small handful of reports, really, and actually not that useful. And I want to use this webinar really as an opportunity to explain more about the dimensions and metrics that are used within GA4 and how they differ from universal analytics, and just take you through a few of the differences and a few of the features. In session 5, we'll start going into much finer detail and start looking at explorations, which is really how most people use GA4, and that's where we can actually build our own reports that are tailored to the needs of the particular business. But we'll get started using the Google GA4 demo account for the Google Merchandise Store. And at this point, we're assuming that you've got GA4 installed, you've at least received a bit of traffic, and now we want to start looking at what's working, what's not working. And the first thing we'll see as we go to the home view here is we get a good snapshot of everything that is going on. And the navigation's a little bit different to universal analytics. We can see here we've got home, and this new feature here just shows us whether the data is sampled or not. If you've got a large volume of data that you're trying to report on in a particular report within GA4, what can happen is Google will actually sample that data to serve it quicker for you. The charts then that you'll see and the data that you see are based on a sample of data, and it will usually tell you what percentage of data it's based on. And you tend to find that sampling kicks in when you ask for lots of bits of data. If you remember back from session 3, we talked about high cardinality and high cardinality data, where you've got lots of different things in the same data set. That can cause sampling of data. So do watch out for that. If you're looking for very detailed data, then what you might have to do is break the reporting window up into smaller chunks. So instead of a whole month's worth of data, you might want to look at just a week or even a day, and in some cases you might have to look at part days or segment the data in some way. One of the big things you'll see, and it is a bit frustrating with GA4, the revenue data doesn't show for at least 24 hours. So if we want to look at this morning's data this afternoon, we can't do that. In the real-time report, it will look at data that's come in over the last 30 minutes. We can see if a purchase event has occurred, if a conversion's occurred. But if we want to go beyond that, then we have to wait until at least the following day. To me, that's one of the most frustrating parts of GA4, and a bit of a step backwards from universal analytics, which allowed us to see the data fairly quickly. I'm hoping that might change. There's been some changes to the processing of data in GA4 just over the last week or so. They've changed a couple of the event names, which has been a bit frustrating for people who have set audiences up. So they're obviously working on more changes to that. But this home screen shows us some familiar terms and also some new terms. Now, users, many years ago, we used to call this metric visitors, but users are simply different. If you try and work out, they're different people. Now, when I say different people, it's because GA4 tries to combine cross-device data and multiple browser data together. So historically, with universal analytics and classic analytics before that, a user or visitor would tend to be a different browser session. So if you've got Firefox open and Chrome open on the same computer, they would show as different sessions and also different users. Same goes for if you were looking at on a mobile device and a desktop device. What GA4 tries to do is combine that all into one user rather than showing multiple users. It'll still show different sessions because they're effectively different sessions, but the big change with GA4 is it does a very good job of aggregating the user data, and that's why you might find in GA4 that that you get a smaller number of users than you would expect in Universal Analytics for the same number of sessions, and it's because it's doing a better job of binding those together. It's not a fault with GA4, it's it is a feature, if you like. One of the other things that GA4 does a lot better is counting genuine new users. There's a dedicated field in the database that is allocated to first-time visitors or first-time users, and that's working pretty well. Of course, it's based on how long you've been tracking GA4 for, which will be only since the code has been installed, but we've seen this data, new versus returning users report, much more accurate than Universal Analytics. We've moved away from average session time or average time on site and those sort of things now, and now we've got what's referred to as average engagement time, and this is because GA4 focuses more on events, and it automatically attracts scroll events and activity, different changes of events, not just page views within a website primarily in this case. So now we have average engagement time, and again this is much more accurate than the average session duration or average time on site as it used to be called, which the cutoff point for when somebody had left the site, somebody could have just left a browser open, and we used to put some features in place, an idle timer that would check to see how long somebody had been inactive for and then try and write that back, but there's always a bit of a workaround. But GA4 does a much better job than this, and again it's one of those metrics. If you're comparing Universal Analytics with GA4, you're going to see the GA4 average engagement time much less than the average session duration on Universal Analytics, and again it's because it's doing a better job of working out how long people are engaged with your content for. Revenue data has not really changed much. The way that that's processed is still fairly similar. There's been a little change in the structure of the data layer that we use to communicate between the website and analytics, but it's fundamentally the same. One question that we get asked quite a bit, this is about the currency that's shown within GA4 and Universal Analytics, for that matter, if you're using enhanced e-commerce tracking. And what we have to do with an analytics property, a GA4 property, is set the base currency. So in the UK, we would set the currency as GBP, British pound, and that would tend to match the currency that you pay your ads in. So if you were using Google Ads, the currency that you pay for Google Ads would tend to match the currency that you're using in GA4 and the primary currency that you're using on your website. But many sites these days support multiple currencies. People can purchase in US dollar, Canadian dollar, yen, euro, pound, and so on. But we need a base currency for reporting purposes. And what happens with the with this is that Google will use the exchange rate on the previous day, and when a foreign currency transaction comes in, it will do the currency conversion based on the previous day's exchange rate, and it will make sure that it's fairly close, obviously, but it might not be the exact same number as your system is showing your own online store, whatever it might be. So there may be a slight discrepancy there based on the conversion, the exchange rate, and obviously exchange rates are fluctuating quite a lot at the moment. So you may see some slight differences there, but GA4 actually handles all of that side of things for you. You can see the individual revenue for each transaction and what currency that has come in on, and what the US dollar value would be or the GBP value would be. But in these aggregate reports, it has to use the base currency. So very useful feature. It can be a little bit confusing how it works, but it does do a fairly reasonable job of reporting that. So as we walk through this report here, we can see that we can get links into the report snapshot, and we'll take a look at the report snapshot in a moment. Real time is pretty much the same, and it does work in pretty much the same way. Even with a brand new GA4 property, you will see that real time will start working pretty much straight away. There are occasions if you've got a brand new property and you're just tracking for the first time, you might not see the data for an hour or two, but in most cases, from what I've seen recently, the data starts to show. We've got the recently viewed, so it takes you through reports that you've recently been to. Quite a useful feature for building a dashboard for people. If there are reports that you frequent on a regular basis, then this is a good, easy way to go back into there. We have this insight and recommendations section. It's very much tied into to Google Ads, of course. And very focused on making Google more money, but the insights do show some useful information. But what I prefer to do is build reports myself, and I'll encourage you to do the same, so you can actually go and analyze your data properly and make your own decisions on it, rather than try and get Google to make those recommendations for you, because in reality it doesn't work that well unless you've got huge amounts of data. It's really not that good, and similar to the recommendations in Google Ads, they're often completely irrelevant. So I don't focus too much on the insight side of things, but it's an interesting feature for you to look through. Into the main section now. Today we're going to be focusing on reports and the advertising section. In session 5, 6 and 7 we'll be going into greater detail in the explore section. But as we come into reports, we first of all get the report snapshot, and this is the first time that you will see the slightly different interface to Universal Analytics. We still have the ability to select a date range. This is a little bit easier to use. We can enable comparison or disable comparison there if we want to. And remember, this is why we're trying to encourage people to get GA4 now. You can't compare a previous month's worth of data unless you know you were tracking that data beforehand. So if you only installed GA4 on the 1st of October, you will only be able to compare data up until that point in time. So we could do a week-on-week comparison at this point, but we couldn't compare the 17 days of October that we've had so far with the 17 days in September, because the data didn't exist until you started tracking it. So that's why it's really important to get the GA4 code installed as soon as possible. You'll notice up here we've got comparisons. This allows us to build different conditions up, and you can build your own comparisons there. I'm not going to go into any detail at this stage because we don't use this feature at all. We use export and we build our own reports at that point. So it's more to demonstrate that this feature is here. If you just want to take a quick look around it, just familiarize yourself with the changes in the interface. But on a day-to-day basis, you won't be making many changes to report snapshots. You'll be building your own explorations or reports. Again, we've got the sampling feature here, and we can see green tick, which means it's an unsampled report. We've got all of the data available to us. And these little icons up here, we can edit the comparisons that we've got. In this case, it's all users, but we could add, let's say country, and by those, and it will just apply those different comparisons there. So again, a useful feature for in explorations, but not that useful at this point. Just close that down. We've got the ability to share the report. If we click on that now, it will actually generate a link. The share report in Universal Analytics was basically you can email a report to somebody. This one will actually give a link through to the report. The recipient of that link needs to have appropriate access to the analytics property, the GA4 property itself, of course. So there's no issues with security there. If you send somebody a link, they'll be asked to sign into their Google account, and if they've got the right level of access, they will be able to see that report. And then insights we've already mentioned. You can go and get insights from Google, which will answer a few of the questions. It's one of those features they're trying to push to encourage people to use analytics more. But my view is actually, if you learn how to analyze your own data almost manually, I suppose, then that's a better place to be in. You can make your own decisions on your own data. We can see there's a number of different types of charts that are available here. We've got bar charts, line graphs, tables, maps, and all sorts of different types of tables, pie charts, all that sort of stuff. So again, we're not going into detail today on those, but we can use all and more of those different types of charts when we start building our own specific reports. The real-time section is based in reports, just underneath report snapshot. And similar to Universal Analytics, we tend to use the real-time feature to make sure that we're tracking things properly, that the code is working properly. Any changes you may have made, any rules that you've set up or filters that you've put in place, you can test here pretty much straight away. But you can't dig too far down here. If we were to take a purchase event, for example, then we don't get what you would think might be a useful bit of information, i.e. revenue. We don't get that. We can get currency, but we don't get the revenue. Can get value if you are sending value in the event name. But most people don't send value in a purchase event name. It's actually the revenue figure. So that was a similar sort of thing in Universal Analytics as well. But really, this is you can put it up on a big screen. It's a lot of people like to have that to see what's going on with their sites any time of the day. But most of us use it just for troubleshooting, just to make sure that tracking code's working properly, and yeah, that's really the main thing we use it for. We can have filters in here, which are a little bit like segments in Universal Analytics. Again, you can select a dimension and narrow down the data that we're seeing at that point. So if I was to look at country, so I could say just US, India, and Canada, and apply that. And now I'm segmenting the all of the data, and we can just see US, Canada, and India data in this case. Moving on now to the life cycle section. We've got acquisition, which you'll be familiar with in Universal Analytics. Pretty much the same kind of data and similar names to what we had in Universal Analytics. The overview reports just give us a snapshot of what's happening here. And you'll notice that lifetime value is it was almost a hidden feature in Universal Analytics, and they're making a bigger deal of it in GA4 because the quality of the data is so much better, particularly with the cross-device attribution modeling and the fact that we can now use data-driven attribution model rather than last non-direct click, which Universal Analytics uses. But we're still not seeing great data in this. It's still a little bit peculiar the way that it's put together and how Google prefer to show the data. But we've still got the paths feature, and I'll be showing that in a moment so you can see how different sources of traffic have contributed to a sale over quite a long period of time. We've still got default channel grouping. Question came up in session 3. We do still have channel grouping within GA4. So here we can see organic search, direct, email, paid search, display and referral. This is a new one here, unassigned, and previously in Universal Analytics that was called not set, but we can see that in place now. We look at user acquisition, first user default channel grouping. Now we're starting to get into slightly more useful reports, and this is more the sort of stuff that we'll be building with explorations. We can see the different channel groupings. We can see that the search facility has come back into the reports here. So if we just wanted to see all paid channels, then we can do a search for paid in the in report search facility, and then we can see the metrics that are associated with those. And you'll see within the drop down you can change the primary dimension, and you can see the now we get things like first user source, this is a useful new feature that we don't just get source medium as we had in Universal Analytics. We can see in GA4 the first user source, the last user source, and we can see all the different contributing source or medium of traffic. You can see the big change in language here is a move from the page view based model to the event model. So now we start seeing engaged sessions, engagement rate, the engaged sessions per user, average engagement time. So things like bounce rate and that have fallen by the wayside. Not a big surprise because bounce rate started to become fairly irrelevant a year or so, maybe a few more years ago, as many people moved to websites that don't necessarily change the URL, and certainly where you've got a lot of scrolling on a site, or if it's on a mobile, then actually we're more interested in the things that people are doing on the site rather than just changing URLs, changing pages. So yeah, I fully support this big move to engagement tracking, and that's why this language is all quite different now. So similar sort of thing behind the scenes, but GA4 is based on events, not page views. Universal Analytics was predominantly page view based. We can look at the different type of events that we've got here. If we wanted to just see the number of purchase events in this case, then we can at this point change the secondary dimension down here, and we can filter that out. We've got rows per page, not a problem in this case, only a couple of rows that we're looking at, but if you need to see more data, yeah, there's still similar features, just in slightly different places. The rows per page was tucked down at the bottom right hand side. In Universal Analytics, it's a bit easier to see just here. We move on now to traffic acquisition. You'll see that the report's pretty much similar, pretty much the same, but we can change the session source medium now, and we can see very similar, very similar information. Again, big change here: sessions or engaged sessions, and for some of these new terms, a similar feature that we had in Universal Analytics. You can hover over if you don't know what an engaged session is. You can see here, and I'll read it out to you. An engaged session is the number of sessions that lasted longer than 10 seconds or had a conversion event or had 2 or more screen or page views. So essentially we're looking at a change away from the bounce rate. That's the big thing here, and we can see the difference between the number of sessions and the number of engaged sessions here is quite significant. And if you were targeting remarketing to people creating an audience, then you might create an audience that is based around the engaged sessions and focus on remarketing to those people. And you could do that with Universal Analytics and build an audience based on that criteria, but this is built into the very heart of GA4. Moving down now to engagement. In the engagement overview, we can see that we've got the new metrics: average engagement time, engaged sessions per user, and the average engagement time per session. Other than that, still fairly similar sort of thing. We've got links through. Always in Universal Analytics, the overview reports are quite useless, more so in GA4. So we tend to just go straight into these individual reports. And as I've already mentioned, the model for GA4 is based on events, and we'll see a lot more individual events that are occurring within GA4 than you would see by default in Universal Analytics. Now, if you want to associate data with some of those events, if you wanted, let's say, for example, an inquiry form, and you wanted inquiry form submitted as an event, and you wanted to send some non-standard data with that. So if you wanted to know the title of the page that the event was on, then you need to use a custom dimension for that. Or if you want to associate a value with it, then you would use a custom metric. But the standard events, things like purchase and add to cart, they have a predefined list of variables that are associated with those as well. In most cases, people are really interested in the page views, the scrolls, and then the hard conversion events, purchases, completions of newsletters, newsletter subscription, those sort of things. A lot of automation, a lot of different types of campaigns now, be it from Meta, Facebook, Google Ads, for example, do rely on the extra data that comes from those view to cart, add to cart, remove from cart, all those different types of events. So the more data that you can record and pass back to those platforms, then the better. If you are running some of those automated campaigns, they're going to do a better job for you. But with an event, an event always used to really be associated with something quite positive. But remember, we can have a negative event in this case. We can have remove from cart. We can have non-purchasers. We can have other things that are negative. So events aren't just positive things; they can be negative things. So if you're feeding conversions back into Google Ads and saying, I'm recording add to cart and remove from cart, then by default they would see remove from cart as a positive event, which sounds silly, but unless we tell Google that it's a negative event, they're not going to do anything about it. And that's why, again, I would tend to use our own custom reports to build better audiences or react to the data differently. I'm not a big fan of using automated digital advertising. From my experience, it just does not work, and that's why I think if you can record as much quality data, as high quality data as possible, then you can start to build your own digital marketing campaigns around that data, rather than get an AI or machine learning tool to do that for you. Particularly if you're a relatively small advertiser, and these days a relatively small advertiser is less than $10,000 a month. If you're talking about Google, so you've got to be a big spender to even really consider some of those automated platforms, despite what Google and others will tell you. We know from the previous webinars that we can make some events conversions, and we can declare them as conversions, and conversion is a goal in Universal Analytics terms, and this allows us to see those individual conversions as they come in. So anything that you flagged as any event that you flagged as a conversion appears now in the conversion report underneath engagement as well. And this is really important for your configuration ready for moving towards building your own reports, because you want to make sure that you've classified all the events as conversions that you really want. Again, fairly limited data here. If we try and dig down into some of this data, we get a little bit of useful stuff, but it's not really as useful as you would hope. And again, that's why we are focusing much more on the exploration side of things once you've understand the different language and the different interface. Pages and screens. We still use, because this is really an extension of Universal Analytics, and Universal Analytics was a tool that was built to track anything, be it a website or a mobile app. We see pages and screens as pretty much the same sort of thing, and in GA4 they bundle them both together, rather than what we had previously was the ability to have a web-based property or an app-based property. Now everything's bundled into one. So wherever you see page, it also means screen, and if you see page title and screen class, then they're again the same thing. We can see on this drop down, we can see page path and screen class, page title and screen name. And then we've got content group. If you do group your content up using the now what has to be the code-based content grouping approach, then you can see that. So there you'll be able to compare product pages with category pages and blog pages and blog categories, that sort of stuff, if you wanted to group those different types of content up in that way. Fairly similar table of data here again. Views, users, new users, views per user, but then moving into average engagement time. And then we've got scrolls. Now scroll tracking is part of the enhanced measurement, comes out of the box with GA4 as standard. The monetization report takes us into just a very rough overview of what's going on e-commerce wise for the date range that we've got selected there. It will give us total revenue and e-commerce revenue. Now you might think total revenue and e-commerce revenue are the same sort of thing, but again, e-commerce revenue, if you want to find out, just click on there, is total revenue from purchase events including tax and shipping. Total revenue is the sum of revenue from purchases, subscriptions and advertising. Purchase revenue plus subscription revenue plus ad revenue. So bit odd that you should have those different in that case. These values are the same. You can see that Google haven't got their own demo account set up properly, and if they have got it set up properly, then they're not making any money out of their own ads. But you would, anything that is paid media should show up in the total ad revenue. We've then got total purchases, first time purchases, and again, this data is much more accurate than it was in Universal Analytics. And for the first time, we can properly track the difference between those users that have never been to the website before and how they differ in their buying habits to those that have. We get average transaction value, as it used to be called, is now average purchase revenue per user. We can see item information. The level of detail in the transaction and the items is almost identical to Universal Analytics. And if we look in the e-commerce purchases section, then we can see basically it's a product report. We can see the individual item names, and then we can see what we used to call the enhanced e-commerce data, but is now just the normal data. We can see how many times the item's been viewed, how many times it was added to a basket, what the basket to view rate is, then the number of purchases, the number of transactions, purchase to view rate, item purchase quantity, so how many people purchase that individual product, and then the total revenue for that particular product. So we're starting to get into slightly more useful information there. We can also get item category. So if you've got your products categorized properly into, in this case, men's, women's, drinkware, bags, apparel, collection, lifestyle. If you've got the item categories set properly, then you'll be able to see how each of those categories is performing. And again, you've got this drop down here. You might have multiple categories, in which case now with the new model for GA4, you can specify up to 5 categories, and it might be that a product appears in multiple categories. You might have dresses, and a dress might appear in the dresses category, might appear in women's clothing category, might appear in red clothing, and so on. So you might have different categories that the products appear in. We can see different brands of items. Again, this data is all associated with the code level with the product. And this doesn't just have to be for what you would class as a typical e-commerce site, a product site. It could just as well be for accommodation. It could be for ticket sales. We can still manipulate the data layer to get that extra data that's in there. So it could be type of ticket that you're using as a group. You could have adults, childs, concessions. You might have different types of ways that you want to represent your data in GA4. What used to be called the new versus returning users report is now called the retention overview, and this gives us a breakdown of the new versus returning users. Again, this data is a bit more accurate than universal analytics. These reports really don't do it justice, but all of this data is available for when you start building your own explorations. But similar sort of things, user engagement by cohort. We've got user retention, so that's engagement, returning visitors, and this lifetime value is there. But again, the data there doesn't look particularly exciting in the sample account. So just real broad reports in this case. We move into demographics overview. The Google demo account doesn't have a lot of demographic data beyond the geographic data available in there for whatever reason, but we still get the same data that we had in Universal Analytics. We can track gender, age, interest categories, and languages. That's all available to us, as well as country, city. The reporting of the specific user location is still not particularly great. As many of you know, we're based in Lizard in Cornwall, and often we appear to be in Brentwood or Rochdale in the north of England, but it's still not amazing. It's not actually a problem from Google's point of view. It's more of a problem with the internet service providers and the way that they surface their geographic data. We go into demographic details. Again, we're not going to see a great deal other than just countries in here. We can see country, region, town, city, language, age, gender, and interest. So almost exactly the same as GA4. In the text section, if we look at the overview here, this is all about the browsers that people are using, the devices that people are on, operating systems that are being used. Still very useful information for developers. If you've got a mobile app, it can be quite useful as well to get details of the app stability. But it's really not necessarily what you would use on a day-to-day basis as digital marketers, but can be useful from a technical point of view if you're trying to push an issue like the compatibility of the website on a particular size of mobile device. You can always go back to the technical team and say, look, we're getting this many users that are on this browser or on this device, and they're having problems purchasing. And you can build explorations to see if the conversion rate is better or worse on different types of device or browser to help you make those kind of improvements. And the tech detail just goes a step further, allows you to see that data in a bit more detail. And again, nothing new in here, pretty much exactly what you saw within Universal Analytics. We do have a library feature that we don't have access to on the demo account, so you get the missing permissions warning there. But you can build up a library of different reports, and that which we'll be seeing as we move on to explorations in the future webinars. And then finally, we'll look at the advertising section. We'll jump past the explore side of things. The advertising report allows us to see performance. And we can see here that we've got channel grouping, but we can look at source platform. And here you can see from advertising platform point of view, it will show things like Google Shopping free listings. It will show Google Ads, or it will show any other manual platform, or if they can't work it out, it will show not set in there. And we can see things like source, medium, and campaign. And if we look at source, this is Google, so we're not going to see too much non-Google stuff in there, but things like email newsletters can be bundled into the advertising side of things. And if you're using any other paid platforms by doing this case, then we can see the data related to that. For me, though, the most important part, the same as it was in Universal Analytics. In Universal Analytics, it was called multi-channel funnels, top conversion paths. The conversion paths within attribution in GA4 is so much better. It works really well. This is an odd set of data, so yeah, it will look a little bit weird in here, but what we can start to see now, where we had the top conversion paths, which is how we looked at how different sources of traffic or different source medium and campaigns contributed to a sale. We can see this in a bit more detail, and a percentage is applied to each of the different sources or medium or campaign traffic here, to see what part they played in getting that final conversion, and that's it's a database model in there. So we can now start to see the true value of a paid search campaign, or a shopping campaign, or an email campaign, or how they interact with each other, and really what value has been attributed to each of those different sources of traffic. So it's an extension of multi-channel funnels, top conversion paths in Universal Analytics. This data is also available to us in an exploration. The problem we had with this data within Universal Analytics is we couldn't use that in the standard reports. It was possible using the multi-channel funnel API to bring it out into Google Sheets, but with GA4 we can now interrogate this data as if it was any other type of data, and we will be going into very fine detail on how we do this, because this is one of the most important parts, and we can do this because the attribution modeling within GA4 is much better than it was in Universal Analytics. So I'm very pleased to see this. They keep changing it and improving it. Sometimes they make a few things worse, but mainly they're making improvements to this side of the reporting. And then if we look at model comparison, here we can do a comparison between cross-channel last click model or cross-channel data-driven model, or we can choose the different attribution models and see how each one of these different models compares. So you can get a good idea of what part email is playing compared to paid search and so on. But again, we do that in an exploration and build a report that is easier to read and understand. So that's it for this webinar, a little bit shorter than normal. What we'll be moving on to in the next session, we'll be going into explorations, and explorations really is what GA4 is all about. It allows us to build our own reports and completely customize everything. We have some standard reports that we use, and we can use templates to build those, and there is a template gallery that you can see here as well. And day to day, this is what you'll be looking at within GA4. Spend a bit of time between this session and the next session just getting yourself familiar with the interface, having a look around, make sure you can navigate around it. and we'll be starting the next session by actually going and building some explorations with some real world examples and building a suite of reports that you will use to do your day-to-day reporting. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat section. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you on the next session. No, don't think we've got any questions there. Thanks very much, everybody. See you next time.